Eleanor Price had stopped expecting her life to surprise her. At 70, the days passed like well-worn pages, the same creak in the floorboards every morning, the same kettle whistle that marked the hour better than any clock. Her husband, Walter, had been gone for 3 years now, and though the neighbors still waved when they saw her trimming the hedge, they had learned not to linger. People were kind, but kindness had its limits. It couldn't fill a house that had gone silent. What no one knew was that Eleanor still spoke to Walter sometimes, not out loud, but in thoughts that came uninvited, in moments when the world felt hollow enough to echo. He'd been the one who understood her love for small, steady things. The hum of the washing machine, the warmth of sunlight on the kitchen tiles, the quiet pride of keeping things running when the world outside no longer made sense. So when the flyer caught her eye that Thursday afternoon, public storage auction, abandoned units, open bidding, cash only, she stood there longer than she should have, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. It had been pinned beside the notice board at the local grocery store, tucked between a lost cat poster and a half-torn coupon for tires. She didn't know why it stirred her. Maybe it was the phrase abandoned units. Something about it whispered of forgotten lives, of stories locked away behind cold metal doors. And though Eleanor had never been the gambling type, she couldn't deny the spark it lit. A small, unreasonable hope that somewhere inside one of those units might be something worth finding. Not treasure, necessarily. Just meaning. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold beside her. The flyer lay flat on the tablecloth, illuminated by the yellow light of the hanging lamp. The logical part of her, the part that counted grocery receipts twice, told her it was a foolish idea. But another part, quieter and older, said that maybe foolishness was all she had left to try. She hadn't done anything spontaneous since Walter died. Maybe that was reason enough. By morning, she'd talked herself into it. She gathered what savings she could spare, a few thousand in an envelope marked emergency fund, and drove out of town in her aging blue sedan, the radio silent, her heart oddly light. The facility sat on the edge of an industrial park where warehouses met wild grass and rusted fences. Rows of storage doors stretched endlessly in both directions, their corrugated metal catching the morning sun like mirrors dulled by time. A small crowd had already gathered, most of them men in worn caps and heavy boots. Some carried flashlights, others clipboards. They looked like professionals, people who had done this many times before, who could tell the difference between junk and fortune at a glance. Eleanor stayed at the edge of the group, clutching her envelope in one hand. The auctioneer, a broad man with a voice that could cut through engines, explained the rules quickly. Doors opened one by one, no stepping inside, bid based only on what you could see. She watched the first few units open, stacks of furniture covered in dust, boxes spilling with old clothes, a broken treadmill leaning like a monument to false hope. The bids came fast, numbers tossed back and forth like cards in a game she didn't understand. Then they reached lot 47. The door groaned as it lifted, revealing a dim, narrow space that seemed at first unremarkable, until the light caught something inside. Against the back wall stood a massive wooden crate, taller than she was, sealed with thick nails and aged so dark it looked almost black. Around it, everything else seemed arranged, neat stacks of boxes, a few pieces of covered furniture, and what looked like a small chest near the front. It wasn't chaos, it was deliberate. Whoever had filled this space had done so with care, as though expecting to return. The crate itself felt like a secret waiting for air. The crowd murmured. One man scoffed that it looked like nothing but junk, another said it was too heavy to bother with. But Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. There was something about the order of it all, the precision, the silence, that felt wrong in the most compelling way. She couldn't explain it, even to herself. When the bidding started, no one raised a hand. The auctioneer looked impatient. Anyone? Opening at 300. Silence. 200. Still nothing. Eleanor's heart thudded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Her hand lifted before she knew it. 200, she said softly. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose. He waited, but no one else bid. A moment later, his gavel struck the clipboard. Sold, lot 47 to the lady in the back. It happened so fast she barely felt it. The people around her went back to murmuring about the next unit as if she hadn't just made a decision that would alter the rest of her life. The manager, a thin man with a clipboard and a tired expression, handed her a key. "You've got 48 hours to clear it," he said. "What's in there's yours. What's in there's yours." The words followed her all the way home, humming in her chest like an unfamiliar tune. That evening, Eleanor sat at the same kitchen table, the key resting on the placemat between her and a cooling cup of soup. She turned it over in her hand, studying the way it caught the light. For the first time in years, she felt something close to anticipation, the kind that makes your stomach flutter and your thoughts race ahead of reason. She knew it might be a mistake, but for once, she didn't care. The next morning, she drove back to the facility with a pair of gloves, a flashlight, and a borrowed crowbar from her neighbor. Her breath misted in the cold air as she approached Lot 47. The door rolled up with a long metallic groan, revealing the same strange order as before, everything exactly where it had been, untouched, patient. She began slowly, opening the nearest box. Inside were old linens, neatly folded and scented faintly of cedar. Another box held books, thick hardcovers wrapped in newspaper from a decade ago. Beneath one of them, she found an envelope labeled personal papers in handwriting that slanted with elegance and certainty. It was sealed but brittle. Eleanor set it aside carefully. Hours passed unnoticed. The rhythm of discovery became its own kind of meditation. Slice the tape, lift the lid, breathe the dust. Each object seemed personal but ordinary. Framed photographs of smiling strangers, a stack of postcards, a brass lamp that still held the faint outline of a handprint. The world that had once lived in this space had been packed with affection, not haste. And then she reached the crate. It stood there like a wall, its surface rough, corners bound with rusted metal brackets. Someone had hammered the nails in deep. The wood was thick, heavy enough to resist her first few strikes. After several attempts, she managed to wedge the crowbar beneath one corner. The first nail screamed loose, then another, until finally a crack opened wide enough for light to spill in. The air that escaped was cool and dry, not the rot of neglect, but the scent of preservation. Inside, stacked with impossible precision, were smaller military-style cases, green metal, each with latches and faint stenciled markings worn by age. She hesitated, her hands trembling. When she unlatched the first one, the hinges creaked like a whisper. Inside was a neatly folded cloth and, beneath it, a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Eleanor opened it and froze. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a pocket watch of gold and enamel so fine it seemed almost unreal. The initials engraved on its cover were MR. Beneath it lay a folded letter, the paper so fragile it could disintegrate at touch. She didn't read it, not yet. She only sat there for a long moment, surrounded by dust and silence and the faint ticking sound that came, impossibly, from the watch that should not have been running. That sound, gentle, rhythmic, alive, was the first heartbeat her house would hear again. And she hadn't yet realized that somewhere, someone else had been waiting for that sound to start again too. For the next 2 days, Eleanor could not bring herself to put the pocket watch away. It sat on her kitchen table, its soft ticking filling the empty spaces of the house like a pulse. She had cleaned it gently, polishing the gold surface until it caught the morning light, but no matter how many times she examined it, she couldn't understand how it still ran. The watch had clearly been sealed in that crate for decades, the air dry, the hinges rusted, yet somehow it kept perfect time. Each second landed with quiet precision, reminding her of a rhythm she hadn't felt since before Walter's death, when life had still moved with purpose. It wasn't fear that kept her awake that night, it was something stranger, the feeling that she had disturbed a silence that wasn't meant to be broken. The next morning, she returned to the storage lot. The sun sat low behind gray clouds, and the air smelled of dust and metal. When the door of Lot 47 rolled up again, the stale air met her like a sigh, carrying the faint scent of cedar and thyme. Eleanor set her bag on the floor, slipped on her gloves, and looked around with a mix of excitement and hesitation. The crate she had opened the day before loomed in the dim light, the wood splintered where her crowbar had pried it apart. The objects inside were still perfectly arranged, as if waiting for her. She started with the smaller boxes stacked beside it. One held folded linens and embroidered tablecloths sealed in plastic, untouched by mold. Another contained a stack of photo albums, each wrapped in wax paper and labeled in handwriting so elegant it could have belonged to another century. Inside the albums, photographs told the story of a life she didn't recognize. Men in uniform, women in dresses with gloves and pearls, picnics beneath willow trees, all carefully dated from the 1950s and early 60s. The name Radcliffe appeared again and again, written on the back of photographs and envelopes. Eleanor whispered it softly, testing the sound. Radcliffe. It felt like a name she should know but didn't. At the bottom of one box, she found a stack of letters tied neatly with faded blue ribbon. Each envelope was addressed to Margaret Radcliffe in looping cursive, the return address printed from a military base in South Carolina. She untied the ribbon and opened the first letter, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the yellowed paper. The handwriting was steady, formal but tender. My dearest Margaret, it began. The days stretch longer each week, but the thought of you is still the only clock I trust. Eleanor read in silence, feeling an ache that was not entirely her own. These were love letters, real, vulnerable, written by a man who believed time could be defeated by ink. She read 3 before stopping, afraid of intruding on something sacred. Carefully, she tied the ribbon again and placed the letters back in their box. But her curiosity had woken fully now. She turned to the green metal cases still inside the crate. They looked military, heavy, rectangular, and stamped with stenciled markings almost too faint to read. The first contained rolls of film, each labeled in careful handwriting. Charleston Trip, 1964, Margaret's Garden, The House. She had no way to watch them, but just holding the reels felt like touching ghosts. Walter had filmed on reels like these when they were young. She could still remember the smell of the projector, the warmth of the bulb, and how the sound of film clicking through the wheel had felt like the heartbeat of their marriage. The second metal case was smaller, locked with a rusted latch. It took several minutes of effort with her screwdriver before it finally snapped open. Inside, carefully wrapped in cloth, was another box, this one made of polished walnut, engraved with the initials MR. The same ones carved into the watch. Her pulse quickened as she lifted the lid. Inside were several velvet pouches and a folded envelope sealed with red wax. She could smell the faint trace of cedar oil and metal polish. The pouches contained jewelry, not costume pieces, but old, expensive things. A brooch with deep blue stones, a string of pearls, and a pair of earrings so finely made they almost hummed under the light. Each one was wrapped separately, labeled in the same handwriting. Then she opened the envelope. The paper inside was thin, brittle at the edges, but the words were still legible. If something happens to me, keep the ledgers hidden. The rest will explain itself. It was unsigned. Her fingers tightened around the page. The rest will explain itself. What rest? Ledgers? Records? The note read like a fragment of a larger story that had been cut short. She stayed longer than she meant to, moving between boxes and the crate, piecing together what she could. Every discovery led to another question. The name Radcliffe Holdings was printed on a few old receipts and shipping labels, the kind used for inventory or insurance documents. One torn sheet bore the faint outline of a company seal. The handwriting, always the same elegant script, suggested that whoever packed this unit had done so methodically, as if they expected someone, someday, to find it and understand. Eleanor didn't notice how late it had grown until the shadows in the unit stretched long and the light from her lantern began to fade. She gathered her things and locked the door behind her. As she turned to leave, she noticed the storage lot was empty. No voices, no footsteps, just the faint hum of the wind against the corrugated walls. She told herself she was being foolish, yet the hairs on her arms stood up anyway. She walked faster toward her car. When she reached the exit gate, a dark sedan was parked across the road, its engine running but lights off. The driver's face wasn't visible, just a faint silhouette behind the glass. Eleanor paused, pretending to check her phone, but the car didn't move. Her pulse hammered in her chest as she unlocked her door and climbed in. Only when she pulled onto the main road did the sedan roll forward, merging onto the highway behind her. It stayed there for nearly 2 miles before finally turning off without signaling. That night, she couldn't eat. The pocket watch sat on the windowsill beside her teacup. It had stopped again, the hands frozen at 11:37. She tried winding it, but the mechanism refused to move. A part of her wanted to throw it away, but another part, the same part that had driven her to buy that forgotten storage unit, wanted answers. When she finally lay in bed, she left the light on. The house felt too quiet. Outside, a storm was building, low thunder rumbling in the distance, wind brushing against the glass. She thought of the letters, the jewelry, the sealed envelope with its warning. Somewhere behind all of it was a story that wasn't finished, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into the middle of it. By morning, her mind was set. She would return to the unit, catalog everything properly, and try to trace the Radcliffe name. Maybe it was nothing, an old estate packed away and forgotten. But if there was truth buried there, she owed it to herself to find it. Because now the question was no longer what she had found in that storage unit. It was who might still be looking for it. The morning after the storm broke with a gray light that softened the sharp edges of everything it touched. The rain had washed the dust from the streets, and the storage lot looked cleaner than it ever had, a false calm, like a stage set after the actors had gone home. Eleanor parked by the gate and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel, watching the wind move through the tall grass beyond the fence. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the thought that someone might be watching or that no one was. Either way, she needed to finish what she had started. She hadn't come this far to stop because of fear. When she rolled open the door to Lot 47, the stale air greeted her again, layered with the scent of damp cardboard and aged wood. The light from her lantern cut across the room, revealing everything exactly as she had left it, or almost everything. One of the smaller boxes she had stacked neatly near the entrance was now tilted on its side, the lid slightly open. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe she had forgotten to close it properly. But as she knelt to inspect it, she noticed a new footprint in the dust beside it, larger than hers, too sharp at the edges to have been made days ago. Her first instinct was to lock up and leave. But another voice, steadier, quieter, the same one that had pushed her to buy this storage unit in the first place, told her that the only way out was through. If someone had been here, they were looking for something specific. And if they hadn't found it yet, maybe she still had time. She began working through the back half of the unit, methodically shifting boxes and furniture, photographing every label and serial number on her phone. Beneath a stack of framed paintings wrapped in newspaper, she found a heavy wooden trunk secured by brass latches. The surface was scratched and stained, but the lock was newer, almost shiny. Someone had cared enough to replace it not long before the unit was abandoned. After several minutes with a flathead screwdriver and a fair amount of determination, the lock gave way. Inside, the trunk was lined with velvet, its contents arranged in rows. A stack of ledgers, thick and bound in leather, each marked with initials and years. The earliest dated back to 1949. The handwriting inside was the same she had seen on the letters. Neat, confident, controlled. Each page was a careful record of transactions, some written in shorthand she didn't recognize. There were inventory lists, purchase notes, and several entries labeled only "Hold for review." One of the later ledgers ended abruptly with a line that read, "Transfer to Greenville site, verification pending." Eleanor read it twice, trying to steady her breathing. Greenville. That was the nearest city, less than an hour away. She took photos of the pages, careful not to damage the fragile spine. Whoever M.R. Radcliffe had been, they hadn't been storing furniture. They'd been storing evidence, the kind of evidence that people didn't want found. And suddenly, the letter's warning made perfect sense. Keep the ledgers hidden. The rest will explain itself. By the time she closed the trunk, the light outside had changed. The clouds had thickened again, dimming the interior until everything was washed in gray. Eleanor wiped her hands on her jeans, leaving faint streaks of dust. She felt the same strange pressure in her chest she had the day she buried Walter, the weight of being the only one left to handle something too big for one pair of hands. When she stepped outside, the parking lot was empty except for one other car, the same dark sedan she had seen before. It was parked at the far end of the row, angled toward the exit. This time, she didn't hesitate. She locked the unit, walked calmly to her car, and drove straight to the small cafe on the edge of town. Inside, the smell of coffee and baked bread helped her think. She took a booth near the window, opened her notebook, and began to write down everything she had found. The watch, the letters, the jewelry, the ledgers. Names, dates, and places, anything that might connect the pieces before someone else did. Halfway through her notes, a shadow fell across her table. It was the young man who worked part-time at the storage lot, the one who had helped her lift the crate on the first day. His name tag read Ryan. "You back at the unit today?" he asked casually. She nodded, closing her notebook halfway. "Yeah, just sorting things out." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before speaking again. "You might want to be careful. Curtis, the manager, he's been getting calls. Said someone's asking about Lot 47. I don't know who, but they sounded official." Eleanor felt the back of her neck tighten. "Did he say a name?" Ryan shook his head. "Didn't share much, but he told me not to mention it to you. So, naturally, here I am doing the opposite." He smiled faintly, but his eyes were uneasy. She thanked him and watched as he left, the bell over the door jingling softly behind him. The cafe suddenly felt smaller, the chatter of customers too loud. Someone was looking for the storage unit, and not through proper channels. She had a decision to make: either turn everything over to the police or find out enough to understand what she was holding first. If she handed it over too soon, the truth might disappear forever, buried under paperwork or greed. That night, she spread the photos of the ledgers across her kitchen table. The handwriting was so deliberate it almost felt like a fingerprint. She circled recurring names, compared dates, and noticed something subtle. The same initials appeared repeatedly beside transactions marked with unusually high amounts: CW, LD, MW. At the top of one page, a line written in different ink caught her attention: "Trust only the museum contact." Beneath it was a small symbol that looked like an embossed seal, the kind that might belong to a collector or historian. Eleanor followed the clue the only way she could, by searching online. Within an hour, she found an old article from a local newspaper about a man named Matthew Radcliffe, a private collector and antique broker who had disappeared in the late 1990s under uncertain financial circumstances. His estate had been dissolved, his assets scattered through auctions and liquidations. The article mentioned rumors of missing documentation and a possible insurance fraud investigation that had never been resolved. She scrolled to the end and froze at the byline: "Assistance provided by the Greenville Historical Society." For the first time, she felt she was close to understanding the outline of what had happened. The Radcliffe estate wasn't just forgotten, it had been buried. The ledgers she'd found might be the missing records the investigators never recovered. And if that was true, whoever had been calling the storage lot wasn't looking for antiques. They were looking for silence. Eleanor leaned back, her hands trembling slightly. The kitchen clock ticked above her, echoing the sound that had followed her since she first picked up the pocket watch. It no longer felt like coincidence. It felt like warning. She switched off her lamp and went to the window. The street outside was quiet, the pavement still damp from the morning rain. Then, just as she turned away, headlights swept across her yard, the same dark sedan rolling slowly past her house before fading into the distance. She didn't move until the red glow of its taillights disappeared completely. The next morning, when she returned to Lot 47, a white envelope lay tucked beneath the storage door. There was no name, no stamp, no handwriting on the outside. Inside, folded neatly in half, was a single sheet of paper with 3 words printed in block letters: "Leave it closed." Eleanor stared at the message, her pulse thudding in her throat. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a command. But commands only work on people who still have something to lose. And she wasn't sure that she did anymore. By noon the next day, the paper warning lay on Eleanor's kitchen table like an order she had no intention of following, and the decision to move forward hardened the way certain choices do when hesitation finally runs out. She drove back to Lot 47 with a thermos of tea, a fresh notebook, and a plan that sounded brave when she said it aloud in the car and slightly reckless the moment the steel door rattled up and released that familiar breath of cool, dust-sweet air. The footprint she had noticed yesterday had softened along the edge, proof that time had passed but not enough to erase the fact that someone else had crossed her threshold. So she started where a stranger might not have looked, beneath the large crate, along the narrow seam where the plywood floor met the far wall, the place Finnish carpenters leave neat and thieves leave clues. It was the kind of detail Walter would have found first, and the thought steadied her hands as she slid the crate forward inch by inch on a moving blanket, revealing a strip of floor that looked identical to the rest until the lantern's angle changed and a different grain flashed back at her. A shallow panel, cut with a fine saw and set back into place, yielded to the longest screwdriver in her canvas bag. Under it lay a felt-lined cavity no larger than a bread pan, holding three things that did not belong to furniture at all: a safety deposit key taped to a folded receipt from Midland Trust and Savings, a narrow envelope stamped with a museum's embossed seal, and a slip of card on which someone had written in a careful, unhurried hand, "If this reaches the wrong eyes, nothing else will matter. If it reaches the right ones, everything will." She did not try the envelope first because instinct told her that paper carries louder consequences than metal, so she photographed the key front and back, logged the box number in her notebook, and placed it in a small pill vial she'd brought for exactly the kind of improvisation that turns panic into process. Only then did she slide a butter knife beneath the museum seal and lift it cleanly enough to keep the impression intact. Inside, she found a calling card printed on heavy stock for a registrar at the Greenville Historical Society, along with a tiny pencil mark that matched the symbol in Radcliffe's ledger and a single line beneath the name: "Ask for documented intake, no phone details." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, letting the simple clarity wash through the fear that had been building since the first note appeared, because this was the first step that felt designed for someone like her rather than against her. A formal channel, a public institution, a place where paper and chain of custody make loud men quiet and careful women safe. She locked the unit, drove to the public library 2 miles away, and called the number from an open corral where the fluorescent lights hummed and everyone spoke in the gentle register people use when they want to be believed. The registrar, who introduced herself as Margaret Ames, listened without interruption as Eleanor described the ledgers, the initials, the watch, and the warning. When she finally replied, her voice carried the calm of someone who has handled many stories that began with a locked room and ended with a headline. And she suggested a discreet meeting in the Society's reading room with no originals in transit and no names written down until they agreed on next steps. By 3 o'clock, Eleanor sat at a long oak table that smelled faintly of lemon oil, her phone displaying high-resolution photos while Ms. Ames leaned close to trace dates and maker's marks with one finger, occasionally glancing toward the quiet doorway as if checking that the past would mind its manners for one more afternoon. The registrar confirmed what the ledgers had already implied. The monogrammed script matched known correspondence from Matthew Radcliffe. The inventories echoed partial lists preserved in an insurance dispute that had never reached court, and the shorthand tick marks beside certain line items aligned with a private catalog system older collectors used when they needed to remember which valuables could be moved quickly and which must never be moved at all. She did not scold Eleanor for opening the trunk, and she did not romanticize the danger either. Instead, she offered the one thing the last week had lacked, which was a path made of procedure, suggesting documented intake for a limited set of pages, a formal letter from the Society asserting an interest in the historical record rather than in ownership, and an introduction to a trusts and estates attorney who was, in her words, boring in all the right ways and allergic to men who hide behind soft threats. They agreed that nothing would leave Eleanor's possession until a written plan existed, after which Miss Ames lowered her voice and told her something that made the small hairs along Eleanor's forearms lift despite the room's warmth. A man calling himself a cultural recovery specialist had visited the Society the previous week asking general questions about lost Radcliffe material, never naming any item, never leaving a full card, only hinting that his firm helped return sensitive items to appropriate hands. The registrar had declined to engage, not because she knew who he was but because the phrases he chose were the kind that asked for trust without offering accountability, and museums learn early to nod politely at men like that while closing every door he might try to wedge open with a shoe. On her way back to the lot, Eleanor pulled into a grocery store and sat in her car long enough for the sedan that had been shadowing her since the library to drift past and continue to the far exit, its driver careful not to make eye contact, its timing just sloppy enough to confirm what instinct already knew. So she opened her notebook and wrote down the make, the color, and the small scrape across the rear bumper, then called Ms. Ames from the parking lot to report the plate partial she had caught in her side mirror when the sunlight did her a favor. The registrar promised to pass it quietly along to the attorney, who would route it to a detective who favored facts over drama. Eleanor thanked her and felt, for the first time since the note at the unit, that a network existed on her side that did not require her to become someone she was not. She unlocked Lot 47 again with a new steadiness, returned the panel to its place, and pulled the crate back over the seam, then moved to the table and did the thing that had kept her sane since Walter died. She turned worry into lists. The ledger pages to scan, the box numbers to verify, the calls to make in the morning, the sequence to follow so that no single step would leave her exposed. She was halfway through labeling a banker's box when a shadow moved across the threshold and a voice she did not recognize asked if he could step in, just for a moment, which in her experience as a church treasurer was exactly the phrasing people used when they wanted to claim familiarity they had not earned. The man introduced himself as Marcus Weir, his suit understated in the expensive way that looks modest until you notice every stitch sits exactly where it belongs, his smile designed to be disarming without giving anything away, his card heavy enough to double as a paperweight. He said he worked with families who needed assistance retrieving misallocated items. He admired how carefully she seemed to be handling things for a civilian, and he would be delighted to facilitate a transaction that kept busybodies and opportunists out of what could remain a respectful resolution. Eleanor, who had spent 40 years watching men in committees try to turn questions into flattery, rested her hand on the notebook, told him she had counsel, and offered to pass along his details. He pivoted to concern, warning that going public would invite all the wrong interest, that auctions were a circus, and that museums never pay enough to make stress worthwhile. He left as politely as he arrived when she repeated that further communication should go through an attorney, though his eyes flicked toward the back wall with the smallest calculation, as if measuring where he would look first if the room were empty and no one could ask him why. And when he had gone, she photographed his card, wrote the time of his visit in the margin, and slid the steel door down until only a hand's width remained, the better to work without offering a stage to passers-by. Halfway through the evening, hunger reminded her that courage burns calories, so she locked the unit and drove toward home by a route she did not normally use, stopping once at a drugstore and again at a gas station, not because she needed anything but because changing lanes under good lighting makes tails commit errors they later regret. The sedan never reappeared, and the quiet between streetlights felt almost honest when she turned onto her block, so she carried the banker's box inside, set the thermos in the sink, and laid Weir's card beside the museum note as if placing two chess pieces she now understood how to counter. If you've ever had to navigate something heavy without raising your voice, you know how much steadier the ground feels when procedure replaces guesswork. So if you want more ordinary person playbooks like this one, tap like, hit subscribe, and tell us in the comments whether you would have called the museum first or the police. We read every note because your judgment helps shape the next decisions Eleanor will have to make. The next morning brought a small, tidy burst of relief dressed as routine. A voicemail from Ms. Ames confirming a scheduled intake for select ledger pages under sealed custody. An email from the attorney with simple instructions about notarizing an affidavit of discovery, and a call from the bank manager at Midland Trust and Savings, who explained that access to any safe deposit box would require identification and a second signatory if the card on file named one. Eleanor thanked him without revealing the number she carried in her pocket and agreed to nothing other than a time to discuss procedures in person, which felt like a way of taking one step forward without giving the world her foot to grab. Back at the lot, the manager, Curtis, chose that moment to begin acting helpful in a way that revealed a change in his incentives. He mentioned that people in the industry sometimes smooth out delicate situations for a fee. He said the words chain of custody as if they meant goodwill rather than evidence, and he placed a brittle kind of friendliness over everything he said, like a sheet that hides a stain without removing it. Eleanor kept her answers bland and her body between him and the crate, then thanked him for the extra lighting he had installed in the corridor, which she suspected had less to do with safety and more to do with making it easier for a camera to capture who went in and out. In the late afternoon, while labeling the third box of documents and listening to the lantern hum faintly, she returned to the trunk for one more pass through the bottom, feeling along the velvet for the imperfection that had caught her fingernail earlier, and there, canted into the corner beneath a strip of loose lining, her fingers closed around a soft leather wallet no larger than a postcard. Inside were 4 plastic sleeves, each holding a crisp photograph of a storage room that could have been this one if you looked only at the outlines. A crate against a wall, a trunk beneath a quilt, a cedar chest in the corner. Yet when she studied the frame edges, she saw different scuffs and a different number spray painted on the concrete, and on the back of the 4th photo a pencil notation read, "Greenville Annex, open only with ledger present." The photos were proof of duplication, the kind of redundancy a cautious man creates when he knows one lifeboat might sink and another must carry the cargo, and the realization tightened her throat because it meant she was not holding the only story, only the one that had surfaced first. She packed the wallet with the ledgers and locked everything twice before driving home on a street made amber by the long light that finds old neighborhoods in late afternoon, thinking not about fear for the first time in days but about sequence, because the plan had shifted from merely protecting objects to establishing a record broad enough that taking anything from her would no longer serve the people who had been circling. She turned onto her block and saw it immediately because absence is sometimes louder than presence. The small brass mailbox lid was no longer flush. It sat ajar by the width of a fingertip, and when she lifted it she found a single sheet folded once with a precision that suggested office habits rather than haste. Inside lay a clean photocopy of a ledger page she had not yet shown to anyone except Ms. Ames, the column with the safe deposit notation circled in red, and beneath it a time, a date, and the phrase, "Bring only the key, no boxes necessary." She stood on the porch, the paper trembling not from wind but from her hands, and understood that whoever had placed it there believed they were still ahead of her, while everything she had arranged with the museum and the attorney suggested that, for the first time since lifting the crate, she might finally be the one holding the clock. She walked inside, set the note beside the thermos, and wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page in her binder, "We open the bank box with witnesses or not at all, and if they want to meet, they can explain in signed language why a stranger thinks my key belongs to them." Then she called Ms. Ames, forwarded a photo of the note, and listened as the registrar proposed a course that felt both dangerous and completely right. Notify the detective, secure the bank's cooperation, and agree to a meeting only if it took place under lights, with badges present, and with the museum's letter of intent already printed and waiting, because if pressure wanted privacy, the wisest answer would be to make the room too bright for it to breathe. By the time dawn crept through the blinds, Eleanor had already been awake for hours. The note from her mailbox lay beside the kettle, its red circle glaring in the dim kitchen light like a wound that refused to close. She had read it a dozen times, not because she didn't understand the message, but because she understood it too well, a summons written by someone who thought fear could be managed like paperwork. But Eleanor had outlived men who underestimated her. Walter had taught her that control wasn't about strength, it was about preparation. And she was prepared now. When she arrived at the Midland Trust branch, the sky was still colorless, the air heavy with the scent of cold metal and rain. The bank had agreed to open early, under the supervision of both the museum registrar, Ms. Ames, and Detective Harper, a man whose calm presence reminded Eleanor of the kind of decency that doesn't announce itself but simply shows up where it's needed. The bank manager, a careful man with rimless glasses, led them into the vault room, a narrow corridor lined with hundreds of numbered boxes, each representing someone's version of security. Eleanor held the key in her gloved hand, the brass warm from her palm, and when the manager asked if she was ready, she simply nodded. The click of the lock sounded louder than it should have. Inside the small box was a single envelope, thick and sealed with wax. Ms. Ames examined it first, verifying the museum's mark. Detective Harper photographed everything before anyone touched it. The manager stepped back, as if distance could protect him from responsibility. Eleanor unfolded the paper carefully, revealing a handwritten document, Radcliffe's personal letter, addressed not to family, but to the keeper of what remains. It began with a confession. Radcliffe had discovered years earlier that his partners had been laundering estate assets through shell accounts, forging appraisals, and staging thefts to cover their tracks. When he refused to cooperate, they froze him out, threatening to destroy his reputation and safety. So he had done the one thing they didn't expect. He hid the proof in plain sight, dividing ledgers, jewelry, and contracts among several storage units registered under false names. The crates weren't meant for profit, they were meant as testimony. He believed that someday, someone decent would uncover them and finish what he couldn't. The final paragraph was simple, written in a trembling hand. If you are reading this, it means honesty survived longer than greed. Do not return what was stolen, reveal it. The room was silent for a long time after Eleanor finished reading. Ms. Ames looked at the detective, who was already making notes in his small pad. "This changes everything," he said. "The fraud wasn't just a rumor. It was an entire network. We can trace the names from the ledgers directly." His tone held a mix of relief and gravity, the sound of a man who had finally been handed the missing piece of a puzzle that had haunted others for decades. Eleanor sat down on the bench, her hands trembling just slightly. For the first time since buying that forgotten unit, the air around her felt lighter, as if the weight had shifted from her shoulders onto the solid table between them, where facts could do the talking. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," Ms. Ames said, "we bring this into daylight. The ledgers will go into the museum's custody under law enforcement supervision. The bank records will support the fraud case. And you, Mrs. Lewis, will be officially listed as the discoverer and custodian of record." Detective Harper smiled faintly. "You've done more than some of my own people could. You made sure the truth didn't disappear again." They left the vault together, the morning light growing stronger as they stepped outside. Across the street, a dark sedan sat parked at the curb. For a moment, Eleanor's stomach clenched, but this time, 2 patrol cars turned the corner and pulled in behind it. The driver froze, realizing too late that secrecy had stopped being an option. Harper gave a small nod to his partner and said quietly, "Looks like the people who left your mailbox note won't be leaving anymore." The next week unfolded like the slow thaw of a long winter. The museum held a private press conference, releasing a statement about the recovered Radcliffe materials, authenticated ledgers, letters, and jewelry that had verified a decades-long pattern of estate fraud spanning multiple states. The names on the documents matched those of several corporate brokers, including one Marcus Weir, now under investigation for intimidation and falsification of asset claims. Eleanor stood to the side of the podium, hands clasped, while the museum director thanked her for her integrity and patience. Cameras flashed, but she barely noticed. She wasn't there for attention, she was there for closure. After the conference, Ms. Ames handed her a small envelope, a token from the museum's board. Inside was a formal acknowledgement and a modest payment for her contribution, enough to repair her roof and replace the old car that had carried her through so many long drives to the storage lot. "You didn't just find history," Ms. Ames said. "You protected it." Eleanor smiled softly. "I think it protected me too." That evening, she returned to Lot 47 one last time. The unit was nearly empty now, the crates gone, the floor swept clean, the smell of dust replaced by the faint sweetness of fresh paint. She sat for a while on the folding chair she'd kept there since the first day, listening to the quiet hum of the evening. It felt strange, standing inside the place that had begun as a risk and ended as redemption. She thought of Walter, of how he would have laughed at her stubbornness, and how he would have been proud anyway. Before leaving, she took one final look at the corner where the crate had stood and noticed something she hadn't before. A small brass screw lying half buried in the dust. She picked it up and turned it in her palm. It must have fallen from the crate the day she'd opened it, a relic too small for anyone else to care about. But to her, it was proof that even after everything had been taken apart and examined, something human always remained, something simple, unpolished, and enduring. As she locked the door for the last time, she whispered, "Thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to the quiet order of the world that, for once, had remembered to reward honesty." Outside, the evening sky blushed pink along the horizon. She drove home with the window cracked open, the cool air brushing against her face. The radio played an old song Walter used to hum when he fixed clocks, and for the first time in a long while, she joined in. If stories like Eleanor's remind you that courage doesn't always roar, that sometimes it simply keeps going quietly and carefully until justice catches up, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share what you'd have done in her place. Every story like this one begins with someone who refuses to walk away from the truth. At home, she placed the pocket watch on the mantel. It ticked once, just once, and then stopped again, the hands resting forever at 11:37. She didn't wind it. Some things, she decided, were meant to end exactly where they began. She turned off the light, closed the door, and let the quiet fill the house. For the first time in years, it felt like peace.